Welcome to JVP Radio, a podcast made by members of Jewish Voice for Peace, the world's largest Jewish organization standing in solidarity with Palestine. My name is Noémie Hakim-Sarfati. I'm a filmmaker of Moroccan and Syrian Lebanese descent, and I'm speaking to you from Oakland, California, unceded Ohlone land.
And I'm Rosa Schwartzberg, a writer, artist, and journalist of mixed Sephardi and Ashkenazi background, talking to you from Brooklyn, New York, otherwise known as Lenape Hooking. Today, we're going to be talking about Sephardi, Mizrahi, and Arab Jews, more recently gathered under the acronym JSWANA. That means Jews from Southwest Asia and North Africa.
This two-part episode will be about return. We'll discuss the physical return of Mizrahi Jews to their lands of origin. We'll try to answer questions such as, how has it been transformative? What possibilities and imaginaries has it opened? And we'll also talk about cultural return. How is cultural return central to our work of solidarity with Palestine? And how is it tied to our political goal of Palestinian right of return? In the first of our two episodes, we will interview writer, curator, and educator Camille Lévy-Sarfati, as well as writer and researcher Livnat Konopny-Decleve, about Camille's experience of returning to live in Tunisia, and about Livnat's research on political imagination. In part two of our conversation on this topic, we will be interviewing musician and spiritual leader Laura El-Keslassi, as well as artist and organizer Shirley Bahar, on the decades-long work that they have been engaged in as artists and leaders around cultural return. There really has been a severing and a loss which we're still in the process of unfolding. It is precisely this collective and intimate work of unraveling that our guests, Camille and Livnat, have been engaged in very unique ways. So Camille Lévy-Sarfati, welcome.
Hi.
I'm so glad to have you here. Camille Lévy-Sarfati grew up in France and decided to return to Tunisia in 2018, where she works as an art curator, a writer, and an educator. She has curated art shows and programs in many cities, including Paris, Tunis, Avignon, and Dakar. Camille, what led you to want to return, and what was the process of soul-searching that led you to Tunis?
Like so many of us growing up in a Jewish family in France, I grew up within a Zionist community. So this idea of return came quite naturally in a process of deconstructing and basically emancipating myself from the Zionist ideology and Zionist narratives. So it took many years, of course. I was very much interested in the idea of ethno-nationalism and ethnocracy in the beginning. Like, how do we change religious factor, which is Judaism? How do we make it an ethnic factor, basically? How do we make it ethnicity? And that opened to so many questions, of course. When I graduated, I was wondering, that was in 2018, I was like really asking myself where I really want to be, where I want to live. And very spontaneously, I booked a ticket, like a one-way ticket to Tunis. And I knew I would stay there. Like, I wasn't going for a trip. I was going to reroute myself in this country that I had never gone to. Like, nobody had returned to Tunisia since my family left in 1957. So right after the Tunisian independence. There was huge taboo in the family and like a very heavy silence. I mean, everything was Tunisian in the house and in the way the family would function or dysfunction, but but like we were not allowed in a way to talk about Tunisia. Like we didn't have space to ask any questions. We didn't have any knowledge. My mom, to give you a short anecdote, my mom would say she's Italian all the time. She even took like Italian lessons, not to say that she's Tunisian in the context of a very racist French society. So that was the family context, a context of silence, of taboo, of shame, also of self-erasure, but also if we take like the political level, France is a very, assimilationist country. Like the identity politics of France are very much related to erasure and to uprooting the diasporas who have settled in France, on the French territory. So there was this very intimate urgency, I would say, to understand what's this silence about. Like, why did they leave? Where do we come from? Why do I have this skin and this face that I don't see where I grew up, which is like in the southwest of France, in a very white countryside. That was the main urge, but also on a political level, it was part of process, as I said before, of deconstructing Zionism and liberating myself from Zionism and trying to prove myself, but also like to prove in general as a political act of repair and of resistance, that there are many safe places for Jews, and that I don't believe in this idea that Zionism is providing
A refuge.
for
Yeah.
a refuge for Jews. On the opposite, actually.
You've been there now for 7 years. What was it like to arrive there, and what has it changed for you?
It has changed everything. I mean, everything has changed in the most beautiful and empowering way, in the sense that, okay, the first years were years of absolute amazement. Like, I was very emotional about everything. Like, I would cry of joy all the time. Like, any street I would see, any trip I would take in Tunisia. My family is from the southwest of Tunisia, near the Algerian border, like an oasis called Gafsa. So, everything was very powerful and emotional. But what's the most beautiful about it is when it becomes ordinary, when it becomes your daily life. When amazement gives place to just the common or the ordinary of your life, because this is my life now. Like, my life is in Tunisia. I feel rooted somewhere for the first time in my life. You're asking how it has been transformative for me personally. Well, this is the first time for the first time I felt liberated from this very deep feeling of estrangement that I experienced in France. And there is this very basic, trivial, physical thing when you arrive in your family's country, which is like, oh, my arms are not that hairy. Like, the way my my family speaks is not that weird. Like, my nose is not that weird. It's just that we're not that French, and this feeling of shame, and like also body shame, or like social shame, or like the way we shout, the way we behave in the in the domestic or public space is not that weird. It's just because our roots belong somewhere else. And it's as if I understood my family and the way I grew up being in the place where we're from. So that was very powerful on a personal level. But except for that, it was also like a kind of repair for the whole family, I guess, because my mom came, and there is this whole connection to the graves. Like, how do you restore the graves, and how do you find the graves that you thought had disappeared? And it's like the only thing that remains when you live, basically. Like, all the goods are gone, all the objects are gone, but the graves sometimes, not always, because many cemeteries have been destroyed, but the dead and the graves remain. So there was also this very symbolic act of repair, and also very concrete material act of repairing the graves that I felt was kind of liberating for the family and helped them reconnect with the country. Like, all the bitterness and anger left space for something else after I returned. My grandma started to speak Arabic again with me, which she said she had forgotten. I mean, she can forget her mother tongue, but she always said she had forgotten Arabic. And as I would like go back and forth, um, once or twice a year at the time, bringing stuff from Tunisia, from Gafsa, to my grandma in Toulouse, in the south of France, slowly, slowly she would, reopen the doors for memory, and like her tongue would start to reactivate other memories than the very narrow narratives of they threw us in the sea, which is not true. Like, they were not. If we talk about the Tunisian case, they were not like um, evicted from the country. There was a series of decisions, a series of small decrees that would, in a very insidious way, push them slowly to leave. But it wasn't like a frontal, radical eviction from the country. So being in Tunisia also helped me to reframe the narratives in between the dominant Tunisian narrative, which is, oh, they just left during the night. We don't know why. Like, they were our friends, they were our neighbors, and they disappeared. Like, they betrayed us. And the opposite narrative, which was my family narrative of, oh, they just threw us in the sea and they kicked us out of the country. So it was also very much about rebuilding memory and reframing our own memory out of national or nationalist frames.
That's so interesting. I get the impression that, your return was driven by a dream and a hope to restore some kind of harmony. But from hearing you, I get the sense that it also has to do with facing the past and facing the current reality. So I wonder if you could speak to this.
Yes, that's not an easy question. Well, facing the past is first facing your family past, which is full of confusion. Like, ask my mom or your grandma or my grandma about why they left and how they left. It's like a huge eruption of confusion. It feels like the question why will remain unanswered for forever, and I guess we have to accept it. So facing the past is mostly accepting that we will not get the answer, because there are so many forces and dynamics that push to the uprooting of this immemorial Jewish presence in the northern part of the African continent, and in general in the SWANA region. So that's first. Second is to face erasure and to fight erasure. Erasure coming mostly from Zionism as a colonial and nationalist ideology that needed to erase the past to be able to build this colonial ethnocratic Jewish state, I guess. But this is huge because everything has been made so that everyone everyone forgot. Like, everything, not everything, but so much has disappeared, and people are getting older and older. I mean, if we talk about Tunis, the Jewish community now is about 1,200 people. Most of them are in Jerba, in the south of the country, and those who are able to talk about that time when there was more than 100,000 Jewish people in Tunisia, older and older, and they will soon disappear. So who will be able to give us the testimonies of this time that we are trying to hook to, but it's just like evaporating, of course. The erasure process is not only the effect of Zionism, although Zionism has probably been the most violent and effective force in this direction. But prior to Zionism, French colonialism has played a huge role in trying to assimilate, if we talk about Tunisia, like Tunisian Jews, but in the whole region, through the Alliance Israélite, through a whole network of schools and assimilation, identity politics that try to separate the Jews from the broader local society in which they had lived for centuries. So that meant putting the kids in French schools and teaching them French, and getting them away from the most basic thing that ties you to your culture, which is the language. Also the names, like my grandma's name is Aziza, but as soon as she arrived in Tunis from Gafsa, to fit the colonial French rule, she changed her name to Odette, and so many people did the same. Yeah. So that was also a kind of preparatory erasure step, yeah, on which Zionism worked really well, to say it in a very cynical way. Also, in the way how it started dividing the local societies, of course playing on feelings of marginalization, on actual discriminations that existed in those societies prior to colonization. Like, the point is not also to idealize the past, but to acknowledge that things were not ideal, things were not easy, like Jews were indeed marginalized and discriminated against over centuries in those Muslim, like dominantly Muslim societies, but of course nothing comparable with Europe, where pogroms and a genocide happened. So going back to those erasure dynamics, maybe we should talk about Arab nationalism, which played a huge role also and still plays a huge role, like until today, if we talk about Tunisia. And this is not only about Jews, it's about any minority that in their perception of the national body doesn't fit this idea of like Arab, like Muslim Arabness,
Yeah.
you know. So it's also targeting Amazigh populations or black populations or Jewish populations. Like the very idea of minority is a problem. This is facing the past and this is also facing the present. I can say that return is always easy because there is a level of distrust that we have to address. And I understand where this distrust comes from when we know how present the Jewish agency has been since the 30s in all of our countries, when we know how much the Israeli Zionist and Israeli intelligence services have been active in so many places here, trying to nourish the discord and the feeling of threat for the Jewish communities. So I understand where this mistrust comes from. It's really not easy. It's really not comfortable. It can be very violent, to be honest. Yeah, I guess there is like a huge gap between the idea people could have of Jews because they've never met or have barely met Jews in those countries, in our countries where Jews have disappeared, basically, and the idea they have of Jews as connected to Zionism. So I guess returning and connecting, like weaving those webs with our countries and with the communities there and the organizers there in general, is also a way to regain this trust. There is no other way. Like, it has to go through daily life. It has to go through talking to your neighbors, living here, going to the beach, going to the grocery shop, opening an exhibition, working with artists. I mean, there is no other way. It's just about like relational bonds that you create, like building communities, basically. And this is a very long-term job or work mission that we have. And I guess this is all the difficulty because we are now facing the horror, the urgent horror of a genocide under our eyes. So it's extremely difficult to project ourselves. And I guess Livnat will be very helpful thinking about that or reflecting on that. It's so hard to project ourselves in the future on the long term. And return is all about the long term. It's all about like envisioning the future on a long term period. And that's like the huge difficulty. But I also feel like this is a huge and central part of the struggle for the Palestinian liberation and for the liberation of everyone, including our communities, those who are willing to return or to reconnect, to restore this link with our original countries.
So that's a question that I had for you is, do you see an analogy between your return as a Maghrebi Jew and Palestinian right of return?
I don't think there is really an analogy. I think we have very intertwined past and future, especially if we think of this idea of kibbutz galuyot, or the gathering of the exiles, and the law of return that was decided, that was voted by the Israeli state in 1950. So this law of return that is giving the Jews everywhere in the world the right to relocate or to colonize, basically, in the Holy Land and to get Israeli citizenship. The way we can return, whether metaphorically or physically, wherever we can, I guess, is a way, like a strong, powerful way to say we don't believe to your lies anymore. And there are other returns, there are other possible returns. I guess that's like the main thing. And it's also a way to center this idea of return, and especially the Palestinian return, like something we have to remind us again and again and again that it's a non-negotiable right for the Palestinian people, and to never give up with that in the struggle.
Camille, I would like to share an extract of a speech that you made at the Vienna Anti-Zionist Conference on June 14th, 2025.
What we are witnessing today, a continuous Nakba, a genocide against the Palestinian people in the name of Judaism, is the result of a collective failure. Our failure to produce stronger narratives, dreams, and perspectives than those offered to Jewish communities by Zionism over the past century. It is time for us all to imagine, I insist, to imagine a shared future that is truly liberated and emancipated from the Eurocentric nationalist paradigm.
And so I'm wondering, Camille, how has the act of returning produced new imaginaries for you?
It's a huge sea of imaginaries that are not so new, actually. It's as if it's like ancestral imaginaries that we are recovering or reappropriating in a way. But it's all about the gesture, the language to relearn, the language that has been taken away from us. Such a rich and impressive and complex language. Like, if we only talk about the language, like in terms of what it gives us, what it offers us in terms of imaginaries and imagination, which is like this capacity of creating images. This is already huge, but it's also about the flavors, about the smells, about the light, about the landscapes. Like, how do we reclaim all of this, and which doors does it open in our minds? I guess imagination is one of the most important tools in a political fight, because this is what is taken away from us. Like, this is what all those forces are trying, especially like nationalist forces, colonial forces, are trying to abolish. And it's also a lot about like how to embrace or re-embrace the narratives, the forms, the representations that were presented to us or constructed as those of the enemy. How do we not only redraw and reframe the categories we identify to in terms of whether ethnicity, geographies, faith, whatever, but also how do we embrace the whole package that comes with it, in terms, again, of language, cuisine, gesture, etc., architecture, etc., etc., etc. And here also it's a huge struggle for everyone, not only people who return, but even people who have grown, who have been raised here, because colonialism, like the French colonization, has done such damage in erasing the way people are able to imagine or to develop forms. I feel like this is a collective way that we are taking, and it's a fascinating journey.
It is. It really is. Thank you
That's
so
amazing.
much, Camille. Thank you for this really beautiful testimony. And I'm really grateful for the idea of producing stronger narratives. It feels really crucial. And this is actually one of the reasons why I invited Livnat to be with us today. Welcome, Livnat.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm very, very happy to have you here. So I'll introduce you. Livnat Konopny-Decleve is a British Academy International Fellow at the University of Edinburgh's School of Social and Political Science. A political anthropologist, she researches the Jewish radical left and alternative political imagination in Israel, Palestine, and beyond. In 2025, with Adi Liraz and Naama Lando, she produced The Rose of Ioannina, a film based on her research. Camille and I have met Livnat through a project we have been involved in together for several years now, of building a global leftist movement of SWANA Jews in solidarity with Palestine. Shortly after October 7th, we organized global convenings online for SWANA Jews. And this is how Camille and I were introduced to Livnat's practice of leading sessions on political imagination. So Livnat, could you tell a little bit more about what led you to the work that you're doing specifically around political imagination? How did it come to appear to you as necessary?
So I wrote my PhD dissertation on Israeli Jewish radical left activists who left Israel out of despair and out of dissent over Israel's apartheid regime. And by doing so, either moved abroad or moved to Palestinian localities in the West Bank. And I thought that once I would interview those people and meet with them, I would be exposed to the most radical programs of what the future can be like and the most radical imaginaries of this future. But I didn't find that. They had an idea of the kind of society they didn't want to live in and the kind of principles they do want to have, like equality, justice, peace, etc. But they had no such imaginary of the future. And I realized that this lack of alternative political imagination is due not only to the fact that they were disillusioned with the possibility of changing Israel from within, and therefore that's why they left, actually, because some of them thought that it is more effective to change Israel from outside, putting pressure on other governments to put pressure on Israel. And others just took a distance because that was the only reaction they could be in, not to be complicit with the Jewish supremacy regime and not taking part of that, not paying taxes, not sending their children to the army, etc. But also the distance itself was a big necessity. Mm. And so I realized that this lack of imagination was due to that, to this very painful disillusionment, but also because people had no language to describe the future they would like to imagine. And so that led me to my current research with people who are trying to think together about alternative political structures or alternative political ways of living, not only in Israel, Palestine, but in MENA or
SWANA.
SWANA, region in general. So this lack of language and the possibility of describing things with words is not only because the language itself is very submerged in our current political imagination. So it's very hard for people to find words that would describe, that would stem from another reality, another political reality. But it's also that other terms like democracy or freedom lost their meaning.
I'm wondering, Livnat, how does one practice political imagination and what are the tools that we have at our disposal to do it?
The tool that I'm using, because I do believe that we have some kind of image of the future that we would like to live in. And what I ask my interviewees to do is to take me to a place that reminds them of the future they would like to see. And while we go to that place, most of the times people know what place they want to go to, but they don't always know why. And while we are in that place, we try to understand why they chose it, why they chose that particular place. And also we talk about the kind of image that they have while we walk in that alternative future. So in a way, this kind of exercise works like a time machine that projects us into the future and allows us not only images that can be translated into words, but also makes the future much more tangible. It helps people not only to imagine that future, but also to imagine the risk that that future involves.
And so now you've been engaged in this project of interviewing Mizrahi organizers in the movement for Palestine for a while now, and I'm wondering how central the theme of return is, and how often does it come up?
The theme of return came up a lot in the interviews, not only with Mizrahi activists, I must say, but with activists in general. And I think that it's not surprising. The return has many facets. In some cases, it's the return of us returning to our origins, like our culture, our languages, our identity as Arab Jews, or there are many definitions to that. So going back to our identities, and but there is also the question of the Palestinian return that is coming back a lot in most of the interviews. And I think that this is due to the fact that as Israeli Jews and as Jews that are engaged with the Palestinian struggle and supportive of it, we understand that the right of return, or the return of Palestinians to Palestine, is one of the most fundamental and most important things that needs to be done in order to decolonize the space and to have a just future for everyone.
Yeah. So I would like Livnat to speak about your film. In your film that's entitled The Rose of Ioannina, which is linked in the show notes, the main character, Adi, returns to the Greek village where her ancestors lived before being deported to Auschwitz, which inspires for her powerful art projects that in some way refer to the current genocide and denounce it. So it appears that for those of us who can physically return, which is not everyone, to where our families are from, return in itself can be an exercise in political imagination. Could you speak to that?
The film was funded by the UK Economic and Social Research Council as part of a program called the Impact Acceleration Account, which means that it's meant to have some kind of impact on the public beyond academia. So using academic knowledge to create some impact in the public. And it is meant to be screened and as part of workshops trying to dismantle many topics. One of them is the topic of return. And indeed, Adi goes back to where her ancestors came from. And she's now living between Berlin and Ioannina, and she wants to have her future life in Ioannina. But in the film, she also says that going back is a privilege, because not all dispossessed communities have this privilege of going back to the place that they came from, a place where they feel rooted in, and finding their cemeteries, like Camille said, or finding a house of the family, even if the family doesn't own it anymore, or finding some kind of tradition, a synagogue, or some kind of traces of the past. So this is a big privilege, to be able to go back to a place and to find material evidence of the past. But there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make this return. It's not only the material structure that needs to be there. We always have to fill the gaps. And also when we go back in our imagination to this past, we don't necessarily go back to the same past. We can go back to the past and take some elements from it in order to think about the future in a different way than our current political imagination allows us to think of. So the past is kind of repository of memories, images, alternative potentialities that never came into term, that never really occurred, but are there. The potentiality is still there, and we could revisit the past in order to take some of those elements and build something new that doesn't exist and maybe never existed before. So it's not a return in the sense of reliving the same past that we had before, but finding in the past elements that could help us build a future, an alternative, better future.
Livnat, you will make me cry. You just touched something very important, that we, like, returning is not about reproducing the past or going back to the past. When we talk about return, we talk more, I guess, about the future than the past. And I'm very suspicious with nostalgia. I think it can be a very hard political enemy in some cases. So yes, thank you, Livnat, for bringing that into the conversation.
Thank you for everything that you just added. It was very good. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, Camille, you met Livnat through our Global Mizrahi Organizing Project. Could you share what the exercise of political imagination that you did with Livnat was like? And how do you relate to the exercise as a returnee?
We met in Marseille, and Livnat asked me to, as she described before, she asked me to choose a place where I could, that could embody the future for me, and where the discussion would take place between us. And as we were in Marseille, and it's a city I don't know, I was asking myself, where could we go? And we went to the Jewish cemetery, which is a very beautiful cemetery. And it was a way for us to be surrounded by the ancestors, and to, reconnect to them, to be able to build the future and to imagine the future.
So Livnat, when I hear Camille's story, I feel like, in a way her return is like following a dream, and it opens the way to new imaginaries. But I can also see how in some ways it's also a reality check. And so, Livnat, I'd like to know, if someone were to say to you something like, this political imagination thing is nice and all, but it's not pragmatic, it's not realistic, and that's not what we need in order to find a solution. It doesn't help to abstract yourself from the constraints of reality. What would you say to them?
First of all, you don't have to start the question by if, because people tell me that all the time, that it's only, in the imagination, that it's not practical, that it's not feasible. People tend to think about solutions for now, especially in times like we are living now, when a lot of solutions are needed, and the struggle is very harsh, and a daily struggle of people's survival depends on it. So this is not something which is strange to me. But this is exactly what political imagination, alternative political imagination, is all about, because one of the things that is constraining us from thinking about alternatives, from breaking out of the structures that we are used to think about, concepts that we are used to use, or words that we think that are the only words to describe the reality, is because of this oppression of the present. The present is oppressive, not only because the political structure is oppressive, but because it has a way of restraining our way of thinking and our way of talking, and eventually our way of imagining the future and claiming other things for ourselves. So in order to break out of all of those restraints, we have to think about imaginaries that are not feasible. Because they are not feasible. They are not feasible because they are being oppressed, because there is a whole structure to prevent those possibilities from being alive, from being born. And it's our responsibility to carry them, to nurture them, and to develop them until the day when they can be born, when they have the possibility to becoming a true reality. The future is a battlefield. There is a battle, there is a conflict over the future, and some groups are just too powerful and they determine what the future is going to be about. We see now how the settlers are using the unique, I'm sorry to talk in those terms, but the unique opportunity that the October 7th events handed them to really put into action all of their dreams, all of their visioning of the great Israel, of settling everywhere, of committing genocide and ethnic cleansing, and making excursions into Syria and Lebanon. So I think we have to be just as visionary and to have those visions of alternative futures for when the future will provide us with the opportunity to make those visions alive and sustainable. That's why I appreciate all the people working on the grounds, risking a lot to struggle against the current situation. But I also think that visions of the future are very, very important and are determinal in the way that the movement, if it will become bigger and stronger, will come into terms in the future.
I wanted to tell you, Livnat, that when I did the exercise with you, I was returning. I was in Lebanon, where some of my family is from. There were no more borders and there were no checkpoints, and we could travel freely like my family used to do, between Haifa and Beirut. And there was no apartheid, there was no occupation, and we lived together, and Palestinians had returned. And there were Lebanese people of all faiths where I lived, and I could smell jasmine, and we played music together. No matter how much people will tell me that that is not helpful, I know it is, because it helps me when I'm in the grind of organizing. It helps me to cultivate my vision. And, it helps me to keep it alive in my heart.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Noemi.
Thank you, Camille and Livnat. And thank you, Noemi, for guiding us through this incredible discussion so far. I'm feeling, I've been, listening, and I've been feeling very emotional, to be honest. The three of you met in the aftermath of October 7th and the beginning of the genocide. It was as part of a convening of leftist Mizrahim around the world for Palestine. I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about how you all came together.
We owe a lot of our organizing today to the original Mizrahi Left project, which was started in 2022 by Tamar, as well as Sidney Levy and Eitan Mizrahi, with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. And this was a first attempt to bring different Mizrahi formations and individuals together from around the world in order to be able to start, recognizing ourselves as a Mizrahi Left, sharing our stories, building a base. All of this was the vision of, building in the long run, a global Mizrahi Left that is visible and that asserts itself as such on a global scale. After October 7th, we were able to build on that original effort to start really focusing on coming together globally as SWANA and Arab Jews, more specifically around our commitment to Palestine liberation. And this was done at the initiative of Nadav David, and it quickly became a collective effort. that's how Camille came into the fold. And, through all of this organizing, we all became part of JVP's By Joksem network. For those who don't know, By Joksem stands for Black, Indigenous, Jews of Color, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. And we'll have a chance to talk more about this JVP formation in our next episode. For now, I'd like to ask you, Livnat, if you could speak about, what our collective organizing has been like from your perspective.
In one of our meetings that took place after the October 7th events, it was so important to gather together Mizrahi or SWANA people from abroad with Jewish Israelis, Mizrahi activists, although it was at the same time very frustrating because there was such a discrepancy between the way people in Israel were able to look at the reality and digest it or analyze it, and the kind of fear and anger and a lot of pain and grief that impeded their possibility of looking with open eyes into what Israel was actually committing. Mm-hmm. And this discrepancy was very formative, I think, for all of us to understand also our different roles and why working together and combining the different perspective is so important, and the role that Mizrahi Jews around the world can have in moving forward this movement and their contribution to what is the Mizrahi left.
And so, Camille, I'm wondering what significance you found in this process.
It was extremely helpful and very empowering in a moment of strong, for me at least, a very strong feeling of isolation, political isolation, where I guess we all experienced very strong family breakups and community excommunications, kind of. So that was not new on or after 7th of October. It started way before. But the violence in which those breakups and attacks erupted after the 7th of October was something I never experienced before, although I did experience in the years before some kind of friendship breakups or family breakups connected to disagreements over Zionism. So it was a lot about bonding, feeling a very strong sense of community, again, like rebuilding community in a very safe transnational place, virtual space. And it was also a lot about co-education and co-learning, like giving each other tools to face the reality, but also to fight for a liberated future, especially for the Palestinian liberation. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. There is something else. The fact that it was a non-mixed group, like the fact that there was like only SWANA, Arab, Jewish, Mizrahi Jews, also provides some sense of safe place in a way, that you don't have to justify yourself, you don't have to prove yourself, you don't have to experience any kind of intra-communal violence, I would say. And this was also very important to organize ourselves as a left, anti-Zionist, Mizrahi or SWANA Jewish entity or gathering, to also be active and visible within the Jewish networks for the Palestinian liberation, or like in solidarity with Palestine, showing that we Arab Jews, SWANA Jews, Mizrahim are not only here to provide testimonies. We're not only here to tell stories. We're also here to, produce concepts, imagine the future, to organize, to lead the struggle. We're also here to, talk and collaborate with our Palestinian or SWANA, more broadly SWANA partners. We're not just here because, they have to include us in the conversation to discuss identity politics or whatever. So that was, in this sense, very empowering.
What has come out of this? What are the next steps?
There are many coming steps. The desire for many of us to organize an in-person meeting or retreat, and the idea would be to organize a new Toledo Congress in the current context that we are facing. So the Toledo Congress was a congress held in 1989 in Toledo, also connected to this idea of convivencia in El Andalus, a time when Jews and Muslims were living together in Spain until the Inquisition, until like the Catholic regime evicted them from this region of the world. And that moment in 1989 was at a time where Israelis and Palestinians, members of the PLO especially, were not allowed to discuss and to meet. Still, they organized this Congress in order to reflect together on the future and on peace and justice. And it was a meeting between Arab Jews and Palestinians, like a Palestinian delegation of the PLO. And many names we know until today were part of it, like organizing it. I'm thinking of Mahmoud Darwish, there was Simon Biton, Ella Shohat, etc., etc. And the idea is to, of course, relate to the elders, to get inspiration from this amazing Congress that was held, but also to reframe it in a way that it's not about Israeli-Palestinian relations, but it's more about like how can we, SWANA Jews and Palestinians together, imagine the right way, the just way towards dignity and liberation for all. So that's the idea. We're working on it. Inshallah, it will work.
Thank you, Livnat and Camille, for nourishing our hearts with hope for a free Palestine and a liberated future. If you are Mizrahi Jewish from Southwest Asia and North Africa, and this episode has moved you, if you would like to join our efforts towards collective liberation, or even if you're just curious about learning more, you can reach out to bijocsm-staff@jvp.org. That's bijocsm-staff@jvp.org, and we will welcome you with open arms. For our listeners who may not be familiar with this strange-sounding acronym, Bijocsm stands for Black Indigenous Jews of Color, Sephardim and Mizrahim. We cannot wait to tell you more about the outstanding organizing that takes place within this formation in future episodes. In the meantime, stay tuned for our upcoming episode, which will be about cultural return for SWANA Jews with Shirley Bahar and Laura El-Keslassi.
This episode was produced by you, Noemi Hakim-Sarfati.
Thanks to co-producers Rosa Schwartzberg and Feivel Rothberg, as well as Eleanor Veil for the intro music, which is an extract from her cover of Lo Galerian. Thanks to Laura El-Keslassi for letting us share exclusive excerpts from her soon-to-be-released album, Yaror Bati. Until next time.
Until next time.
يا ربي